Hello there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. I was inspired after vacation to make a big sunglasses block. Now this pattern will make a 15-inch block, but I also printed it in this pattern at 50%, which would make a 7.5-inch block. And I made it two ways, with and without a reflection. The instructions are pretty simple. There are only 5 sections for each pattern, and just put the 5 sections together to complete the block. The first thing I do is cut apart all my sections. This is a 15-inch block, so some of these sections must be taped together. The way I do that is cut a zigzag or curvy line, and then it's easy to match up the pattern matching lines and just put a little tape on to join them together. Once I have all the pattern pieces cut out, it's time to make decisions about fabric. I chose a pink for the eyeglass rim, a black fabric for the lens, and I chose a beige fabric for the background. I cut a long strip of that pink fabric so that I could cut the individual lengths for each piece. Now, just a note, when you're looking at the pattern face up, you want to measure your piece of fabric wrong side up. For angled pieces, I fold the piece up and then I cut around, giving myself plenty of seam allowance. I continued cutting out the pieces for each section, and I'm stacking them up in the order that they will be sewn. Once I had all the sections cut out, I took my stack of sections, so there are 5 sections altogether, and I just flipped the stack over so I'm ready to sew. To make things go a little quicker, I've got my iron and my wool pressing mat right next to me. Remember that you don't want to use any steam in your iron until you're all done tearing off paper. To start the process, I took the piece I had cut for piece number 1 and number 2. I'm going to place those right sides together, and I am going to line up the stitch line on the back of the pattern because we're sewing on the front where the pattern shows, but the fabric and block will be reverse on the back side of this paper. If you're dealing with dark colored fabrics, it's not as easy to see through the paper to see where your seam is lining up, and I'll show you what I do for that on the next piece. Make sure your stitch length is set to 1.8 or less. For this first piece, I'm being a little extra cautious. I feel like when I flipped that paper around, it kind of came off center, so I just wanted to make sure that everything was still in the right place before I stitch this seam. Once the seam is stitched, I trimmed off extra thread, then I trimmed off any excess bulk, then I pressed that seam open. Now it's time to add piece number 3. This is where the dark fabric comes into play. It is easier for me with dark fabrics like this To fold the paper back on the seam line that I'm going to be sewing, and that's the line between piece 2 and piece 3, I just fold it back, trim off the excess from that seam, then I know exactly where to line up this fabric for piece number 3. I'm going to put that piece right sides together with this unit, and then I'll be able to stitch on my seam line and press the seam open. I always take 2 or 3 extra stitches before and after the seam line. You can see how these pieces are starting to make that curve of the sunglasses. Now it's time to add piece number 4. As more and more of those pink pieces are added, you can really see the curve of the sunglass. All right, now it's time to add this last piece on this sunglass section. It's this big angled piece of background fabric. Now I wanted to make sure I had a nice straight edge. It was a little bit off, so I took my scissors and just made it straighter. These angled pieces take a little bit of getting used to. It's wrong side up now, so I'm going to flip it upside down so it's right side up. So the right side is going to go against my unit on the back of this piece of paper. Once everything looks good to me, I go ahead and stitch that seam. Next, I trimmed the excess thread and folded on the seam line and trimmed away the excess bulk from the seam. Then I pressed the seam open. And here's our first finished section. That's going to be trimmed on the dotted lines of the pattern and then put together with the other sections. I went ahead and put together all the sections for this pattern, and now we're going to talk about trimming. These pieces are so large, I am definitely using my mat and a ruler, a nice big ruler, and a rotary cutter to trim these dotted lines. Here are the 5 sections that have been trimmed, and I've got them in the exact order in which they're going to be sewn. We're going to sew these 2 on the right together, then we'll sew the 2 on the left together and add that middle slice, and then we'll put those 2 parts together to complete the block. In a perfect world, you wouldn't need to use clips. I am not perfect, so I use clips. I'm going to put these 2 pieces together, and I see where my pattern needs to line up with the other piece, which is the inside frame of those sunglasses. I'm going to place clips on that, double check, make sure when I stitch this down, they're going to match up. For some patterns, you need to leave the paper on till the very end, but in this case, I'm tearing it off after I sew 2 pieces together. I really don't need it for the next stage. And here we stitch the last 2 parts together, matching the bridge of the sunglasses. I will leave a link in my description for where you can buy the pattern on my Etsy shop. I am picturing some kind of beach blanket where every pair of sunglasses is a different color, and I think that would be super cute. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope to see you back again real soon.